Hello, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk, Let's Listen. I am so excited that you have chosen to spend your time with us this evening. It is my hope that this will be an opportunity for enlightenment. I am so grateful for this opportunity to come before you, and I ask that you just sit back, relax, and open and expand your minds. Tonight's show is going to be a discussion about white privilege. I know that's a rather controversial subject, but in this day and time, in today's climate, I believe it's a discussion that needs to be had. And it needs to be had in a respectful manner, but it also needs to be had in a very candid conversation. And that is what we hope to do tonight. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm so sorry. Let me introduce myself. My name is Felicia Hamilton, and I am the host of Let's Talk, Let's Listen. I have invited three wonderful panelists that I'm going to introduce to you very shortly, that have agreed to come on and to have this conversation to perhaps gain enlightenment themselves or to help to enlighten their friends, their families, their loved ones. So without any further ado, I am going to bring in my guest panelists. We have Jonathan March. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome. We also have Lauren Migliozzi and Jeff Bennett. So I am one by one going to allow them an opportunity to introduce themselves to us, and then also just tell us why you agreed to be a part of the panel discussion tonight. So first, Jonathan. I think you're muted, Jonathan.
Yeah, there. Hi, Jonathan March. Can everybody hear me okay? Just give me a little wave. Cool. Yeah. Let's see. I live in Oakland, California. I'm 42 years old. I'm recently divorced. I have two kids. I come from a tech background. I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. If people are curious to hear more about that, I can speak more. And basically, I just decided to show up today because I'm very concerned about what's going on in the world. I've been doing a lot of my own studies around racism and race in the country, and trying to learn more about that and trying to do more self-reflection and understanding my part in this. And specifically around white privilege, I think of it more in a broader category of privilege that I think is where I'm entering the conversation. Obviously, white privilege is what we're here to talk about today, and that's kind of a core issue. But I think the broader perspective of privilege in general is easier for more people, particularly people who are white, to be able to reflect on more deeply. So that's why I'm here today, just to listen and hopefully learn some.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Miss Lauren Migliozzi.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so as Felicia mentioned, I'm Lauren Migliozzi. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about 8 miles right outside of the city of Pittsburgh. Moved to Washington, D.C., 7 years ago. And I live here in Tysons Corner, Virginia. I'm in software sales. And that's a little bit just about me. I'm single, no children. I'm 29 years old. But I've got a huge Italian, awesome family, and, just really, really grateful to be a part of this discussion. I think for me, why I wanted to talk about this tonight is, as a white person, I believe we need to, as white people, acknowledge that white privilege is really a thing. It does exist. And yes, it exists because of historic, horrific racism and bias, but it is this unseen, silent advantage that was given to me as a white person. And I think we need to acknowledge that and talk about it, especially with what is going on in our world right now. Really what's been going on for years, but what's really coming to light right now. So I'm really just grateful to be a part of this and to learn more from you, Jonathan, and the other panelists, and you, Felicia, and give my perspective.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lauren. I am looking forward to this conversation. And last but certainly not least, my coworker and friend, Jeff Bennett. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Felicia. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion. A little bit about me. I'm 53 years old. I work at Splunk with Felicia. I'm a solutions engineer. And I grew up in West Texas. After a time in the Marine Corps, I landed in Dallas, and that's where I've been for about the last 25 years or so. And I think there's a lot going on in Dallas. We actually have a black police chief. We have a black sheriff, and there's also a whole lot of racial tension in Dallas, as there is really everywhere right now. The topic of white privilege, I believe, is important, because I think that's the result of systemic racism to some degree. And so, the white privilege is just going to bubble up with that underlying racism that has been going on generation after generation that creates what we're calling white privilege. And I think a lot of people get uncomfortable, to Jonathan's point, calling it white privilege. I think white people will become defensive, and it makes it hard for people to really talk about it, because they do feel defensive. I think white people feel attacked, and they don't really want to see that. So my purpose for being here is to talk about it from my perspective, to listen, to learn, and help see if we can find solutions to move forward.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Very well said. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. So without any further ado, I want to just kind of dive into this conversation. And I did a little research prior to the show this last couple of weeks, just kind of trying to make sure that I fully understood it. There are a lot of misnomers out there. It doesn't really exist. It's just made up, And so I want to start first of all with the definition of white privilege, and this is according to Webster's. And it says that white privilege is an inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. And just to expound on that a little bit, I want to give, this was like one of the best examples. Well, not one of the best, but it was a pretty good example. And it was just, it's so plain and so simple. There's an essay written by Peggy McIntosh. It's said to be a groundbreaking essay from, back in 1988 is when it was officially published. And she says, for many, white privilege was an invisible force that white people needed to recognize. It was being able to walk in a store and find that the main displays of shampoo and pantyhose were catered toward your hair type and skin tone. It's being able to turn on the television and see people of your race widely represented. It's also being able to move through life without being racially profiled or unfairly stereotyped. And so when I read that, I thought, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I wonder, some people have a hard time with white privilege until you actually start to give them examples. And so that's one of the things that I want to do today. I want to share some examples, and then I want to get your thoughts on them. I will tell you one of the things that has always irked me in certain neighborhoods or certain areas with a certain demographic. You can go into a Walgreens or you can go into a CVS, and the black products, the black hair care products are in a particular section in full view of the register, or maybe there's a manager area. So it's in full view, and oftentimes it's under lock and key. So when you think about that, let me first ask this question. I'm just curious. Have any of you, this is to all three of you, have any of you ever had or experience where you walk into a store and the products that you were wanting to buy, I know we have opportunity, we have certain products that, for instance, at high dollar value, but your shampoo, was it under lock and key? Exactly.
No.
And And I'll say growing up, seeing that, it was the norm for me. It was the absolute norm. And it didn't really register to me that it was rooted in racism. It rooted in a stereotype that Black people were going to steal. And it was only probably about 20 years ago. I am 50, almost 50. About 20 years ago, that I started getting offended by it. I'm like, what is this? What are you saying? Stores, I stopped buying those products at those stores. I take my money elsewhere, because if that's what you're telling me you think of me, then why should I purchase from you? And so to me, that was in her essay that it's just so plain, and it just makes so much sense. And when you think about that, my question to Lauren, let me ask you this question. When you hear that, what does that spark in you? How does that make you feel to know that this is what African Americans in this country have put up with and accepted as okay for years?
Yeah, and honestly, just as a woman, knowing that when I walk into a CVS, the shampoo and the lotions and the pantyhose, and they're for me, I mean, and I don't think, and it's this unconscious, and I'll get to your question, but I just wanted to comment on that I walk in there, it's just an innate thing that they're there and they're for me. And then you notice that the products for the Black woman are separate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not with my products. They're separate.
Yes.
They're in a separate, and there's not as many of them, and they're on a different shelf, and they're all together, but they're separate. And I don't have to deal with that because I'm the majority. So I go in, the store is catered to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like if I have a child with a white man and my child is white, the Barbie dolls are going to be catered to her.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go into a store to buy Christmas gifts, it's not going to be difficult for me because it's just already innately for me. And it's something that when I'm in the CVS and I'm purchasing, it's a subconscious thought of, oh, those are the products for, Black hair.
Yeah.
But it's not, and it's just like, honestly, it's, for me, it's so heartbreaking that I almost feel like I'm trapped inside because I don't know how to make it end for people like you. Like it's so painful for me that I feel hopeless. I really do. Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm so grateful that we're doing this, because this is now taking us from a place of hopelessness to just letting it continue. Right. Oh, well, if it's not directly affecting me, then I can just keep, moving on about my life. I can move through life without having to deal with this because it's not actually my reality. So yeah, I think I would sum it up as true hopelessness. That's how I feel. And anger.
You hit on something, and actually we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. And it's what can you do about it? How can you help? And what's interesting, and what a lot of people who are aware, okay, because there is a large majority of people who are non-people of color, I'll just say it that way, who are quite aware of white privilege, but they don't know, well, what can I do about it? I can't change that I'm white. And I'm like, absolutely, you're correct. And I've actually had this conversation with a group of people that I presented a speech before in Toastmasters a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about white privilege. And so thank you. Perfect segue for later. We're going to talk about, okay, how to use your white privilege for good, And absolutely, Jonathan, you got something you want to add to this?
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to throw this in there, but it's something that does kind of raise for me how it ties back to sort of the question is sort of where that fits systemically in things. So you can imagine that there's probably someone, if you presume that it's not overt racism, like explicit racism against Black people, you wonder if there's somebody that works at one of these companies like CVS or Walgreens who's responsible for merchandising, who, I mean, I'm not trying to defend it all, just let me be clear here, but you don't know anything about their racial background, but they might be somebody who's looking at data and trying to make this decision. And they say, well, I'm looking at data that says that Black people are arrested more for shoplifting, so we're going to put those items behind this thing. But then you trace that back and you realize that it's actually an issue with policing. Right. So like, even if there was like a logical train where somebody could defensively say, this is why we lock these items up, because there's also like, I know from my experience, I don't have the experience that you have with that, but I know I've gone in to buy like razor blades, and razor blades are locked up because they're a high priced item that's easy to steal. Right.
Yes.
So that there probably was data that went into that decision, right? That may not have been racially oriented at all. They're like, well, this is a high priced item. It's easy to stuff in a pocket, so we make sure we lock it up, right? So you could see a logical argument where somebody would extend that and say, well, then we should lock up these other items for some other reason based on police profiling data and the way that system has oppressed Black people. So I just find it interesting to sort of extend the considerations of what might be bringing that, how that's a bigger part of the systemic problem.
And I can appreciate what you're saying. And I want to go back to a point you made earlier where you said, well, the question that you posed, well, perhaps maybe there's some data that says that Black people are, arrested more for shoplifting. And so this is what I want to pose, the question I pose to you. Perhaps, is it possible? And I don't know if this is a true stat, but if it is, let's just say that is has been proven. Is it because Black people are watched more closely in stores?
Yeah. This is exactly my point. It's a systemic problem at that level.
Yeah.
It's trickling down to just the average person walking in a CVS now has to like deal with the fact that somebody pulled out some data just out of the blue and said, well, this just allows me to do this, and I'm going to lock this stuff up. And here's my logical reason why, that they can tell their boss or whoever. Even if like CVS and Walgreens had a like anti-racist policy, they could go, oh, well, look at the police data for shoplifting in this area. Well, okay, but that's because the police are maybe, arresting Black people a lot more and letting white people get off with these things. So that's why the data says that, right? So that's not a justification for anything. It's just more continuation of white privilege and more continuation of the oppressive nature of the system. I guess that's my point. Yeah.
Well spoken. I totally agree with you. I do not disagree. So thank you so much for that, Jeff. Jonathan, sorry. So I want to move on to something else. I in my research about white privilege, I decided that I wanted to look at our criminal justice system. And I pulled a few cases, so to speak, and I compared them. I did some comparisons of convictions, sentencing for a Black person who committed a certain crime, and then a conviction for a white person. And I found some very disheartening things. Some you've probably already heard about. For one, let's talk about Ethan Couch. Who's familiar with Ethan Couch? Jeff, you're in great state of Texas. You know who Ethan Couch is, yes? Unmute yourself, Jeff.
That kid that the affluenza kid, right?
The affluenza kid, yes.
Yeah. So this kid, in case anyone doesn't know about Ethan Couch, he's a very affluent child of affluent parents. Has really gotten away with a lot of things over the course of his life, and was drunk driving and killed, I believe, a family of four, yes. and got off with probation because he got the lawyers that were available for him, top-notch lawyers. His family had connections, and they were able to get him to where it was just probation. And you can imagine the outrage, and you can imagine what would have happened had this been say a black male that
Right.
would do you think that, and I'm throwing this out there, I'm just saying, I don't know the ethnicity of the judge, but do you think that white judge is going to give that black male that killed a family of 4 probation for doing that? And I mean, you don't even have to answer that. You already know the answer to that, sadly. So yeah, that's and the whole thing about why Felicia said the Ethan Couch and affluenza is that is what his defense was.
Yes.
The defense team came up with a condition called affluenza because he was so affluent he didn't understand what the repercussions of his actions were.
Right from wrong, and consequence.
Yeah. So it's privileged. It's sickening the way that happened. And I mean that was not racial. That is socioeconomic. But it certainly could have been racial if things had been different.
And so that's a good point that you make, Jeff. But I can tell you, every African American that heard about that story, to us, purely racial.
Oh, absolutely. I totally understand that. Yeah. And I mean, and you know, I think some stats that I think everyone has read or heard about that. African Americans are jailed more frequently for the same crimes than white people are. They're jailed longer, or they're jailed, and instead of being put on parole, I believe there are people that are serving life sentences for pot, which is now illegal in like 11 states, something like that.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things. I mean, that's all a part of the systemic racism, and it's a part of, and by systemic, I mean thinking that prisons and policing are going to solve the problem instead of social change, instead of education, instead of a more. I'm trying to think. But social services to try to bring up the people that need the most help, and not kick them while they're down and put them into jail.
Right. And you know, as you said that, it reminded me of yesterday. I participated in a protest down in DC, and the sign that I created was simple. It was divest in policing and invest in communities. And that term has been floating around a lot lately. A lot of times you hear is defund, and people are misconstruing what we're saying. We're not saying take away all of the police, the monies that are earmarked for police to protect us. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying we need to rethink what we're doing and how they're responding to these calls. Every call of emergency should not necessarily mean that a police officer needs to go out. How about a social services worker? Let's start paying them some more money so they can actually do their jobs. Let's start investing in the communities and creating programs and making sure that we're educating our children so that they can see that there's something better. They have better opportunities because they are educated. But because we're constantly seeing, where our communities are just left to fend for themselves, and the monies are just, the money even that is in the community constantly is going out of the community. And so that's what we're saying when we say divest in policing and invest in communities. But that's a subject for a whole nother show. And we'll talk about that some other time. I wanted to give you another example, just to kind of counter. Okay, so Ethan Couch, he gets away with killing 4 people. Because he has affluenza disease, is what it's been classified. We have a young man, Dayon Davis. He is I believe he was in Atlanta. Dayon Davis was with a friend. There was a pair of sneakers very expensive pair of sneakers that someone was selling. Dayon goes with his friend to look at the sneakers and make the purchase. While they're there, a friend of another friend of his friend pulls a gun out in an attempt to steal the sneakers. This 15-year-old who was just there, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, tried as an adult for armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Dayon Davis was Black. So here I am, I'm looking at Ethan Couch, killed 4 people. Dayon Davis participated in a robbery, didn't have the gun, didn't pull the gun on anyone, and he gets 5 years in prison. He's tried as an adult at 15. So this is just one example. You know, I have so many more. We have the case where, and this one is the one that probably bothered me the worst. There was a young lady, and I didn't write her name down, who was abused by her husband and had been a documented abuse. Police had been called many, many times. There was a moment in time where he was in a fit of rage. He was going to kill her. She had a gun, to which she put up in the air and fired a warning shot. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison for that. And she's Black. She lives in Florida, and so they have the stand your ground law, correct? Everyone's familiar with that. I think we all became quite familiar with stand your ground with Mr. Zimmerman and the Trayvon Martin shooting. And so I look at those two and I compare. I'm like, okay, so Trayvon Martin was gunned down by, I believe he was over the neighborhood watch group. He's just walking. You know, I don't know the full detail. I wasn't there. None of us are ever going to know what really happened. There's a lot of evidence that supports that he really just initiated all of this. However, he was acquitted. And so, you know, again, we talk about white privilege. And to African Americans, when we look at these situations, we just still see racism. And so I'm going to give you a chance to speak, Lauren. I saw your hand was raised up earlier. Was there something you wanted to add to that? That last discussion? Fire away.
I do not know how to say this eloquently at all.
Go
And
for it.
maybe it's going to be very controversial, but I just have to speak my mind because this is Lauren's opinion, Lauren's thought, and I'm sorry if it hurts someone. But
No, this is why you're here, so speak freely, please.
when you talk to me, because I did not know about Ethan, is it Ethan Couch?
Yes.
Because I live in Virginia, I wasn't in tune with that case because it wasn't widely broadcast, given he's got parents who are affluent and have connections. So clearly I didn't know about it. But when I hear that, I truly think it's a racism issue. Like, yes, the parents, yes, his family had, you know, socioeconomic status and connections. But honestly, I think even if the man was the teen was Black with parents who had connections, I think he would have had a different outcome. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's a racism issue beyond just a socioeconomic issue. I think that played a part. But it's interesting that the crimes that we see, like especially with all this gun violence, a lot of times when it's a white person committing the crime, there's somehow something tied to them. They were bipolar, they had schizophrenia, they had the flu, but somehow when it's a Black person, it's just never are you going to hear that a Black person killed someone because they, you know, they were abused as a child, or it's just, and it goes back to the underlying issue that no one wants to talk about, that is racism. Absolutely. So for me, and I'm sorry that I'm putting it out there, but I think these things need to be put out there. I mean, me as a white person, I'm not racially profiled. I'm not stereotyped. I'm not unfairly stereotyped when it comes to race. Now, as a woman, we have, you know, things that's another issue, but that we're not talking about today. But it's just, you know, if a white person commits a crime, they're looked at as deemed crazy, or they have a disorder, or they had influenza or what. But if a Black person, and I really hate to use this word, but they're deemed as, you know, someone who's, oh, he was a thug, or a this or a that, or he, you know, and to me, it's just, I just had to get that out, because when I heard why his case was, I'm like, well, we could say that about so many cases with white people. So I just wanted to say that and bring it to light, because, you know, he's not the first one that's been deemed something.
Right.
That wasn't the truth.
Right.
So.
Yes, Jonathan, jump right on in. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, also doubling down on that a little bit. I'm trying to remember her name. Not Kathy. The Jones woman, Black woman that had the whole thing about Monopoly. So she watched that. She had that video about Monopoly and her explanation for systemic racism about playing all these hundreds of games of Monopoly behind. It's been making the rounds as a viral video, but she brought up Tulsa and Rosewood in there, and I was relatively ignorant of those events. And then I went to find other sort of like instances of race massacre or race violence in the United States, and I found an enormous list, dozens and dozens and dozens of these instances. Enough so that at this point, I sort of feel like even the sort of affluence from a white person, there is some amount of racial oppression built into that affluence just across the board. I mean, the racial violence in this country dating back, you know, hundreds of years, it's hard to say that there's not some amount of that racism, even in the affluence side of that argument.
Right.
Just wanted to double down a little bit on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And you know, I want to pivot just a bit, and let's take it away and move away from the criminal aspect of white privilege, you know, and that social injustice, because there are also instances of white privilege that may be quite subtle. And so one of the things that I want to do today, what my hope is in this conversation, is that we really be able to kind of dig in there and give really good examples of white privilege in areas that sometimes you don't necessarily, as a white person, you wouldn't necessarily think that that's privilege. You know, simple things like walking into a Walmart, as I did a few months back. I was at a cabin retreat with some girlfriends. Lauren was one of them, and we go to Walmart, my Hispanic friend and I, who also was with us, and we're walking in Walmart, and I see, and we're being silly. We're silly girls on a girls trip. So we're just having fun and enjoying ourselves. We weren't loud or bringing any attention to ourselves, but I go down this one particular aisle, and I see this gentleman that he's pushing an empty basket, and he passes the aisle that I'm on. He's on the back end, and just kind of glances over, and he moves on. And then I go down the next aisle, she and I see this same gentleman with his empty basket come down the aisle. And then we go 3 aisles over, and then I see this same gentleman with his empty basket come down the aisle. And I looked over at her and I said, you know, we're being racially profiled, right? And she was, what do you mean? I'm like, that's loss prevention, and he's following us. Because obviously we look like thieves. And so I want to ask my guests, Jeff, when have you ever gone into a store and you had loss prevention follow you? Has that ever happened?
Not that I'm aware of. No. Along those same lines, not necessarily going into a store and things like that, but you know, we have a mutual friend, Huguette, who was a sales rep at Splunk. She speaks French, and her sales territory was in the Quebec area of Canada. And so there's a lot of people that speak French up there. Whenever we would work with customers and then we would go on site a couple times, I'm with her and we walk in, and with a name like Huguette, it's not really going to tell you what what race that might be. And certainly she's well spoken and very soft spoken. I don't know what sort of preconceived notions you may get from talking to her, but I would walk into a room of white men in tech with this black lady, and she would introduce herself as Huguette in French, and it was, I could see in the room, and that was a chance to see how people were a little taken back at times. Not everyone, but it just standing there and seeing that reaction. And later on that night at dinner, I asked her about that, and she says, "Oh, that's just all the time." And that's, that was an opportunity for me to see that, standing next to her, the way people are looking at her whenever they understand for the first time, oh, this is a black lady that's coming to visit us. All this time we've been talking to her on the phone all these months, we thought she was white like us.
Yeah. Great observation. A lot of people don't open themselves up to really see. I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just, they just don't recognize it, but it happens all the time. And so one of the things that I have seen, and we've been talking about a lot lately in my circle of friends, is, for good. Because your white privilege is your white privilege, and that's okay. I mean, it just is what it is, and there's nothing you can do about that. But using it for good, because in the time that we're in, I saw a poster that was posted outside the Black Lives Matter Plaza that to me summed up everything. And it said, "Ready or not, a change is a coming." And I saw that and I took a picture of it. I posted it on my page, and I'm like, this just speaks volumes, because I believe that right now we are at a turning point. We are at a turning point in our country. We have momentum, and it is time for everyone, not just blacks, not whites, everyone, to stand up and say, you know what, this has got to stop. We're going to use our voices, and we're going to do what we can do as a people. We're going to pull together, which I found out yesterday. I was at a protest that in Swahili, Arambe means pull together. And we begin to shout that over and over again in a protest. And it was so powerful, because in that moment where we just kept saying Arambe, Arambe, it was as if you could just feel each and every person in that moment pulling together, getting on one accord and saying, we can do this. All of us, we can do it together. Yes, Jeff, go right ahead.
Yeah, in speaking of doing it together and choosing to not do that, I think it is white privilege to not speak out when you see this sort of thing.
Yes.
I think that is white privilege by staying silent and by not doing something. I was at the rally at Dallas City Hall yesterday, and we had a rally there. We marched through downtown, and there was probably 200 or so. It wasn't huge. It was I had hoped that it was going to be a bigger rally than that, but it was good, and we had umbrellas with the names of people that were black that were killed either by police or in police custody, and walked through there. And there was I was happy to see that there was quite a few white people there supporting and joining in. And I think that that's going to be something that's important, is to speak up. There's lots of people that I know that don't believe that white privilege is real. And that's it's incumbent upon me to say things. And I can't force anyone to change their mind, but I can put it out there and let people hear it and maybe at some point even think about it, even though I think a lot of times they just won't.
And I think we're at the point now that we have to absolutely get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Being silent is complicity. You're signing off on it if you don't say anything. let's just say, for example, how many times, and I don't want to throw you guys under the bus, but this is a real question, okay? Real question. Jonathan, I saw your hand earlier, so I'm going to come to you with this question, and then you can share whatever it was you wanted to discuss. Have you ever been in a group of people and there was an off-color joke made, or, you know, a downright racial comment made, or a racial slur made, and it made you super uncomfortable, right? But you sat there silent. Has that ever happened?
It's absolutely happened. I don't even recall specific instances. It's been many, many years, honestly, probably decades. I live in California, so there's not as much of that out here. But growing up in Illinois, I was around more of that. And I know just from sheer peer pressure, I kept silent.
Right.
Obviously, I'm older and more mature now. Times have changed, you know. The thing for me about it is not even about the silence and keeping silent, is that what coming together is going to look like right now is going to be sacrifices from those who are privileged. That's the thing that I don't think people have realized. And I mean, like, financial sacrifices, like reparations. Like, if that happens, it's going to be like privileged people's tax money going in and being paid out to people that aren't them.
Yes.
And that's what there's like for that to happen. There's a very serious coming together that's going to have to reach some inflection point to make that happen. And I think there's still people who are like, oh yeah, I'm ready to come together, but they haven't accepted that means personal sacrifices, financial sacrifices, like status sacrifices, all kinds of types of sacrifices of their privileges, not just the privileges that they can give up. Like I might feel privileged now with some of my wealth that I've accumulated in my life. I have to I do have to willingly give that up to solve this problem.
Right.
Like whatever percentage of it, I have to say, no, I'm going to start donating to these causes. I'm going to start being willing to fight for taxes of mine to be paid out to underprivileged people. And that's just an aspect of coming together that I think sadly, we have some ways to go on that. So
yeah.
That's the only reason why I really wanted to call that out. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. And, you know, a lot of times when you start having that conversation, you hear, oh, we're not turning into a socialist society.
Exactly.
And, you know, I get really irritated because I think to myself, okay, this is America. We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, right? But you have this huge disparity. You have the haves and you have the have-nots. And you have to ask yourself why. Because if you have a job, if you are working in this country, you are paying taxes. And so I just feel like everybody should have an equal opportunity in this country. For instance, here in DMV, we call it Dallas. I'm always going to be a Texan. Good grief. DC, Maryland, Virginia. It's called DMV. This is the most expensive area that I have ever lived in my life. It's ridiculous how expensive it is. What I pay in rent is triple what I could pay in Texas for a mortgage. And so I look at that, and the question is asked, you're paying someone $15 an hour, but you're expecting them to be able to pay $2,500 in rent for a one bedroom in DC? And then you wonder why people are suffering and why there's crime. And I think that we just have to take a look at and start making policies. And that's the other thing. That's the white privilege. Although everyone needs to be involved in these decisions that are being made that affect all of us, but those with influence need to start standing up and saying, you know what, this isn't right. It isn't right that those essential employees that made sure you ate have to work 3 and 4 jobs. And that's real. That's not made up. Some of them are working 3 and 4 jobs in order just to pay their rent. And Tanya, you're right. Tanya Powell, one of our listeners, she says, and the gap is getting wider. And we've got to do something about it. And so that's another way how we use our white privilege. Yes, absolutely. Go, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the gap in some ways, though, is that it is actually helping us reach that inflection point, because the reality is that, like, there's the 1%, and there's all the people below the 1%. There's a lot of white people below the 1% too.
Yes.
And that gap there is getting so wide that it's pushing all these white people to start to, I mean, it's happening slowly, but fast. It's accelerating now. Yeah. To start to see themselves as the same as some of these underprivileged people, many of which are Black. So it's there's multiple gaps there, obviously, and there's not just gaps on like economic wealth and income and these kind of things. So I don't mean to gloss over that, but yeah, it's also to go back on your comment about being in a store and being profiled. I feel privileged that I have had that experience of. This is the first time I've heard about loss prevention as like a role, but I have had managers of stores follow me around when I'm looking like I just got out of prison or something with a wife beater kind of shirt on and not shaven for days or whatever, just looking, but being white. Okay. And I've experienced that and been like, frustrated and angry and be like, walk out. But then it's my white privilege to be able to say, well, yeah, that's happened to me like 5 times that I could really tell you the stories of in my entire life. And I think that there's this aspect of like really diving into that and realizing how free I've been and how privileged I've been to not have experienced that more regularly, once a week, once a day, going out everywhere I go, like it's the same with police profiling when getting pulled over. Not to quick change topics here, but the last call that you did, I think every Black person that spoke in your last panel like this had experiences of having guns pulled on them by the police. And I'm like, yeah, I fear the police too. A lot of white people were like, yeah, we fear the police. We fear the police. I've never had a gun pulled on me. Okay. That's not an experience I've ever experienced. That's a whole different scale of fear of police. Okay.
Yeah.
So, anyway, just to double down on that one real quick, but anyway, somebody else can speak for a little bit.
Thank you, Jonathan. All valid points. And just to kind of go back a little bit to what you just shared regarding the last call that we did, and we were talking about, those very real scenarios where individuals, I think one was her registration was expired and it was only a few days. And she's in Texas, and I happen to know for a fact that the law states you have 30 days to re-up and to register your vehicle after it expires. So the very fact, first of all, that she was stopped, and then she was terrorized because I believe she said 4 police cars came and pulled guns on her, all for driving while Black with an expired registration of only 3 days. And I mean, I'd like to know how many white people think that would ever be a situation they would find themselves in for an expired registration. Not very likely, And so these sorts of things go on all the time. And so I want to we've got about 12 more minutes left. So I want to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover. So I want to kind of dig a little deeper into what can be done. We know that, as you said, Jonathan, that those with privilege need to start using that privilege and make sacrifices. I think also speaking out in everyday normal circumstances, speaking up for people, they don't have to be people you know. And so what I envision in this new world that we're about to live in, I envision someone seeing, in a grocery store that someone is being, racially profiled, because you can see it. If you open your eyes and you choose to see it, it exists and you want to acknowledge that it exists. Speak up for that person. That's how you can use your white privilege. And to me, that and among a few other things, we've definitely got to reform our criminal justice system. And that's going to take all of us speaking up and getting involved in the lawmaking. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is the fact that I believe our Constitution says we the people. And this is a country that was created for the people, by the people, but the people are not having any say. You've got a select group of politicians who make all of the decisions, and most of those decisions that they're making are decisions based on that they're getting pressure from the lobbyists, right? and those who are, funding their campaigns and those who are lining their pockets. And I just say, you know what, it's time for us to stand up and truly run our own country. And how do we do that? We go to the polls, we elect people, and then we hold them accountable. We don't allow them to keep making decisions for us that the majority of us don't agree with. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican and you're a Democrat, or the person in your district is a Republican, or a Democrat and you're a Republican. We got to hold them all accountable, because they're supposed to be there representing us and our ideas. And so again, that's how you use white privilege, is you stand up with your influence, you stand up with your money, and you say, no, that's not right. We have to make sure that we are serving the underserved. And so those are my thoughts on that. Lauren, I saw your hand. So
yeah, I just quickly want to add to your point. I think there's no distinction in value based on race or skin color. And I think to end white privilege, we have to deal with racism. I think as white people, we have to stop denying our own racism. You hear so many white people. As a white person, I have had so many conversations with white people that say, I'm not racist. But then you see actions or behaviors, or you hear comments that would allude to, well, we just talked about how we're not racist, but we're denying our own racism. So, and I think I just want to share an example of, because in the beginning of this conversation, I said I felt hopeless. Like I felt hopeless for Black people and felt hopelessness. And now you're opening up my eyes to all that I can be doing. I have a friend, I won't use her name, but her son was noticing that his friend, who's Black, was getting in trouble at school. And was asked to take, I guess he wore a hoodie one day, and he was asked to take it off. Her son, a young kid, 12, 13 years old, decided, Mom, I'm going to go to school every day and I'm going to wear a hoodie, and I'm going to see if I get in trouble. And now here's a 12-year-old white boy wearing a hoodie every day, and then a 12-year-old Black boy wore a hoodie one time, got in trouble, was asked to take it off. This kid started a campaign, like wore a hoodie, I can't remember how long, couple weeks, nothing was said to him. Now, if you take that story and you actually bring those things to light in your sphere of influence, that's how I think white people can help. Because, okay, that child may not have been able to change every school district, but he sure can bring to light what's going on and change his. And then it continues. So I just wanted to share that story, that if a 12-year-old boy can, and as a white person, if I have a son and he's white, I'm never going to have that conversation with him. I'm never going to be scared for him to wear a hoodie, ever. Like, I just wouldn't be.
Right.
So I think the first step is we have to stop denying our own racism and then act.
Yes.
But we have to accept it first, because white privilege is not going to, we can't deal with that until we end with racism. White privilege is a result of racism.
Absolutely. Yes.
So.
Thank you. That was pretty powerful. I appreciate you sharing that story, and kudos to him. I mean, at 12 years old, he recognized, first of all, the injustice in that, right? The unfairness in that. And then he said, I'm going to do something about it. And so, yeah, that's awesome. And if a 12-year-old can do it, let's stand up, adults. Let's rise up and make a difference, is what I say. So we have just a few more minutes in our show, and I would like to give an opportunity for everyone to just kind of share what you're taking away from the show today and the topic of conversation, and what, if anything, do you plan to do in order to use your white privilege for aiding this movement? So we'll start first with Jeff. You're
for this is, can you hear me? Is my
yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah. It's the thing I'm taking away from this is really that there's a lot that we need to do as white people to call this out, to make sure that we address these issues. And that this white privilege is something is based on the systemic racism. We talked about that, and to be able to use this unfortunate platform, I don't know how else to say that, but is to use that to speak up and to help point out racism and find ways to heal and make things right, is really, that's what I'm taking away from this, looking for ways and making sure that I continue to speak up, and that I make my voice count. And that not everyone's going to listen to me. A lot of people won't. A lot of people will despise what it is that I say. I can't change those people, but there are people that will listen, and there are people that want to understand, and those are the people that I can work with.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll say to you, Jeff, on that note, you're responsible for sowing the seed. You're not responsible for the growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thank you that, you stated, you shall be brave in speaking out regardless of the outcome. And I think that's important. We sow seeds, they get watered by other people, and eventually they produce, or they don't, right? But we're not responsible for their growth. We're responsible for at least sowing that seed of love, because, racism is steeped in hatred. And the only thing that's going to love is the answer. And that may sound cliche to some people, but it's the truth. And I fundamentally believe that if we start to just love people, we can see a change in this country. So, Jonathan, I'm going to move to you, and go ahead and just share with us, just your final thoughts about what we've talked about and what your key takeaways are, and what you think that you're going to be able to do to put into action. And use white privilege for good.
Yeah, I could probably talk way too long on this, so I'm trying to figure out how to make it brief. Personally, I'm involved in another discussion group with a group of people that get together, and it's a group of anti-racism sort of efforts. So we're meeting like once a week and having discussions around particular topics. Mostly right now, it's just videos we're watching and then reviewing and having just a conversation around that. I'm reading a ton. I read a lot of moral philosophy right now. I'm trying to understand sort of what's happened with America in terms of our moral failings, because I think that that's the best way to articulate to people, particularly in like Facebook conversations and things, about how, how love is the answer in a way, but like how morally we've diverted from sort of Jesus' message of, love one another as I've loved you. So there's a little bit of that where I'm doing work with that. I'm also trying to work at a sort of the systemic level. I'm looking at, I'm contributing some of my own money to nonprofits that I care about, but I'm also looking at maybe starting my own nonprofit, which is sort of oriented at helping people to make sure that they can direct their funds to less privileged people than themselves. I think a lot of fear, I know I've donated a lot of things to like Goodwill or whatever, and then you find out that the execs of that company are making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in salary and bonus and whatever, and paying like below minimum wage rates to ex-cons and like all this kind of stuff. It's just like, okay, I don't want to contribute to that kind of nonprofit system. So I've been looking at what kind of nonprofit could exist that ensures that people are not only directing their funds to less privileged people, but directing them to local people, so they know that they're directing their neighborhoods and communities around them. So like one of the nonprofits I'm contributing to now is an effort to support Black women in the Bay Area and specifically around Oakland area. So okay. I know that when I donate to that, it's going to affect the neighborhoods directly around me, people that I might be seeing at the grocery store, people that might be passing me on the road. So that's all the stuff I'm doing. A lot of psychology, philosophy, economics, just trying to study it all, and racism, and also shifting away from white authors. I'm trying to read a lot more from Black authors at this point. So yeah.
You go, Jonathan. You're getting woke, huh? I love it.
You know, you got to do what you got to do. Now's the time.
Keep us posted on that foundation, because I would love to be involved with that.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And we're just almost out of time. I am going to give Lauren a few moments to go ahead and share.
Well, I think for me, the biggest thing is just that I gained from this, and that this really inspired me to be bold. I will be honest. Yesterday, I did not go down to DC because I had fear. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm seeing so much violence on the news, and the media is portraying riots and looting. And I'm scared that if I go down there, does my voice really matter? What if I get into a situation where I get hurt? And that's just not the right perspective. That's not what we need right now. And I think this just showed me that my voice does matter, and I have to step out and be bold. Yes. Because if people think the way I did yesterday, then we're never going to change. So this just really encouraged me to just be bold, and that my voice does matter. So Jonathan, I actually am going to send you a note. I'd like to know what you're reading and what you're listening to, so I can make sure I'm doing the same.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. I love that. I'm super proud of you for that. So thank you so much. And to each one of my guests, thank you, Jonathan, Jeff, and Lauren. You don't know how much it means to me that you said yes and you participated tonight. And so I just want you to know I appreciate you. I hope that you will come back in the future for one of our other shows and another discussion. I would love to have you and to hear your opinions and your thoughts. So thank you very much for participating tonight. And to those who are viewing online, thank you. Thank you for wanting to expand and open your minds and be able to this topic and learn how you can make a difference. I am so excited about the direction of our company. I feel so hopeful, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'm excited that I know now that I too can rise up and use my voice for good. And so I invite you, if you have not already done so, please go to Let's Talk, Let's Listen, and invite yourself, or actually like the page so that you can get notifications. Dana Bowman, thank you for spending your time with us. I love you back. And so that's all for tonight. And I look forward to another session and spending some time with you and another panel of guests in the next 2 weeks. I will see you again. So have a wonderful evening. God bless you all. I love you and I appreciate you. Good night.